Good morning. I think it's good morning. I have to read this because I have a very bad habit of digressing, and I don't want to keep you all here, but because we're all passionate about where we're at, why we're at this point.
Can you all hear at the back there?
And
You want to this?
No, this is just recording.
Okay.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah. A bit more louder.
step a little bit
Closer.
Don't stand back there. Jason's done a lot of work on this.
So
Yeah.
I don't have COVID and I haven't got rabies, so you can come a little bit closer. Just one comment. I think we're all a bit sensitive about discussing the PSA because of the confidentiality agreement relating to growers. A few people, I don't know how many, have gone up and read the deed of settlement, which I would note was only drawn attention to growers on the 12th of January, after several weeks of discussion in the Pioneer, because we were very, very concerned about our contracts, the most valuable contracts in Australia. Make sure everyone understands that, because that's exactly what they are, and can be bought and sold for various degrees of money, even to today, but not 3 years after, if this PSA was hypothetically accepted and signed. We must get far better prices than the indicative prices offered for 2024, with government pressure if possible. We must have something in place well before the end of this year to ensure sustainable prices at or above the cost of production for the 2025 harvest. A suggestion is that we get federal government backing with the ACCC involvement to have a national independent panel set up to work out indicative prices region by region. Now, I don't have a magic wand and I don't have a tablet that will solve the problem. I'm only throwing out a suggestion. I'm not saying you people have to agree with it, and I'm not saying that I might even think exactly the same about it next week when I look in the mirror and think it over. But at the moment, this is only a suggestion, okay? Because we've got to have something better than what we've got now, which is nothing. Prices based on sustainable cost of production, and better if the market allows it. The composition of the panel to have 2 independent experts, pull them from the list of under the Code Secretariat, under the website of Australia Grape and Wine Incorporated. That's what these independent experts, there's a whole list of them that haven't been used by our winery, I might add. But anyway, that doesn't matter. We might not have got a better deal.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? That's all good stuff, but it's post-rejection of the supply agreement.
Yeah, I'm not linking that. This is a bigger issue.
Today, we've got a meeting coming up on the 12th of February, and I personally would love us to have some form of action to go to that meeting with.
Well, we can put that to the end, can we? Because I mean, we've got that, but we've also got the bigger picture thing. That's one of the reasons why the camera crew is here too.
Because don't forget, not every grower is a CCW grower. You know what I mean? Like
okay, the composition of the panel to have 2 independent experts and a grower representative from each grape grower region. One winemaker representative, possibly 2 at the most. This due to the power of the winemaker lobby currently, the undue influence they have politically and industrially, and as a redress for the many years of our national peak body, Australia Grape and Wine Incorporated, with a board of 11 winemakers to 3 grape growers, determining national policy relating to the industry and us. There will be many growers who will not make it to 2025 after 2021, 22, and a particularly disastrous harvest in 2023. Many over the last few years have sold water off, and there are more that will need to do that from now on, just to survive or to cut their losses. After that, they have nothing more to sell except their land. And real estate agents currently have noticed, particularly in the last few months, a drying up of the interest in vineyards. That will get worse if things don't change rapidly. Vegetable growers aren't going to step in and become the majority of buyers. They are concerned about their commodity prices, with predatory behaviour and the influence of supermarket chains in the marketplace. Television stories currently have shown that. We growers face our own internal battle where we have to ensure nothing changes our CCW area contracts, the most valuable grape crops in Australia. Our board needs to step up to the plate and remember they represent the grower members of a cooperative and need to act differently to a board running a company listed on the stock exchange. Communication needs to improve rapidly. It has been badly lacking and badly handled. The board needs to negotiate far better prices than the indicative prices, and if those negotiations stall and prices are nowhere near sustainable levels, enter an expert determination process. But do a correct procedure. Investigate fully in advance the use of, for example, the SA's Small Business Commissioner's Office, whether they can involve themselves in mediation, which won't cost us anything, and may or may not, if it was used last year, and our CEO and board at the time did not look into that because, as Jim Godden said to me when I went and questioned him about it halfway through the year, he said, oh, well, when I read blah, 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 that it was voluntary, I didn't bother to pursue anything any further. So we had 7.5 months of litigation and none of us yet know the cost of that, which probably already been paid for. Lawyers didn't do it for free, but a rumour I heard was about $360,000. But I don't know whether that's accurate or not, so don't quote me. So I hope the board has investigated options of mediation properly without having it just done by lawyers. It was a suggestion, as I said, I made to the chair of CCW, Andrew Cassabaum at the time, and the last CEO, to do this as a preliminary prior to the 2024 harvest. And it was well before Jim Godden resigned as CEO. If this hasn't been done, it is not only bad business, it is negligent and a dereliction of duty on the part of the board to its grower members. We can't have this part of 7.5 months of legal fees all over again because, I don't know about you, but I'm not paying any higher levy to pay for further legal advice. So, and then we ended up with the signing of this deed of settlement rubbish on the 23rd of November. Did any of the people concerned or our board come and discuss it with us first? Surely one of the most basic things in any business negotiation is the power of both parties to have the right to walk away. Did someone handcuff these people in a room or lock the door and say, you bastards aren't going to leave until you sign this document? Because I haven't heard yet where someone has been able to say from my board, we had to do this because.
Especially, can I just add a point there where you were saying that they went into this meeting and they were railroaded basically by this negotiation period of the price of the winter from the previous year and trying to put this in there as a deed of settlement. It's got nothing to do with each other. It's a separate issue. The issue that we were discussing with them is the price, and they're bringing this in as a ploy. And if you think about it, if you think about all of our Shirazes and Cabernet that were picked, and you look at the tonnages that went and how much money they were holding back, probably $5 to $6 to $10 million. What's that for a big company like this? Do you know what I'm saying?
It's blackmail.
You know what I mean?
That's what
it is. So if you really think about it, where this ploy or whatever, so as Jason said, I agree. We're in this situation now. We can't look back and spit the dummy at what happened, because that's happened. But we just got to think about and know about what happened and why we're here. And yes,
and
read
make
the
sure
document.
it doesn't happen again.
Yes,
exactly.
and make sure it doesn't happen again. But read the document, understand what it is for you individually and as a group, and then make your decision. But definitely remember how it happened.
Yeah. The last point, just on that deed of settlement and in relation to what we've just said, is transparency. The issues around transparency would certainly, frustrate a saint. There is more mystery around the deed of settlement, how it eventuated and why it was signed, unless I've missed something and had a sleep for about 6 months and all you people were told by our board and somehow I missed out. There's more mystery about this deed of settlement and the whole process than a nun doing the dance of the 7 veils. It's disgraceful. Anyway, sustainable prices are our priority for 2024 vintage and beyond. That's got to be number one because that's our bread and butter. Then we have a bigger picture to address and get in place. There's a number of slides in this bigger picture. But one of them, for example, a national prescribed mandatory code of conduct for wine grape purchases with stiff penalties for breaches of that code. If we had this in place in 2023, we would not have had a murky road of 7.5 months of litigation after an expert determination decision was refused. If there was a prescribed mandatory code, one party would not have been able to get up, no matter which party, and said, no, we're not doing it. So you've got to remember that. Because currently we have a voluntary code that is a gentleman's agreement designed in about 2008. What deal do any of you people do that is a gentleman's agreement in the absence of a written contract? Do you buy a house and say, oh, yep, done deal? Do you buy a car? But look what we have to put up with. And no one on any of these peak bodies has stood up, despite all the money they're paid, and said this is not right. No politician, federally or state, has stood up and said this is not right. And the CEO of Australian Grape and Wine Incorporated, after about an hour and a half's conversation leading up to Christmas, where he had education on what was a spray diary and why, in fact, a certain winery wouldn't supply the software to CCW and wouldn't sign contracts for transfer and a number of other unusual corporate behaviours. And he said, well, I really didn't know any of that was going on at a grassroots level. That's fair enough. He works and probably lives in Canberra. But at the end of it, he actually said, person X, as the CEO, on a personal level, I might, from what you've just said to me and from some other things that I sort of have found out about, growers aren't being treated fairly, etc., contract issues, payment issues, etc., around the country. I might like to do something to look at changing that. But as the CEO of this national body, my employers are 11 winemakers to 3 grape growers. So that's the barrow I have to push. And that's the barrow that gets pushed in Canberra that determines national policy that filters down and affects every one of us. And that is why all these well-meaning people, and there's quite a few of them, on grower bodies and so on, have not achieved anything of consequence, where even from 2019, the ACCC has entered reviews, discussions, all sorts of stuff. There's just been a tantamount to talk fest on the need to change a voluntary code to a prescribed code. And I could give you quite a lot of detail about that, but one good piece of news about that is the chair of the Inland Wine Regions Alliance group, which is the Riverina, Murray Valley and the Riverland, that represents about 65% of grape growers, and Jim Caddy's the chair, he sent an email to the ACCC guys that are involved in this and said, we now have no option but to that we need a mandatory code. But up until that point, on the 21st of October, at the end of October 2023, that was done, and nothing was lodged at a federal level. And what I'm going to mention to you now is not that I want any pats on the back or that this will go anywhere. But in the absence of, or thinking that, for example, it's got to be better than that. Because otherwise there'll be another 2 or 3 years of an ACCC review. And where are we going to be in another 2 or 3 years with a voluntary code? So I put what I thought was something that we need as a national industry, this prescribed mandatory code with stiff penalties. Aren't they 3 fairly major factors? Fairly significant factors, aren't they? And most people in SA, let alone nationally, don't even know that. Okay, so Mr. Passon selected his chance at media attention with a nice picture. Beautiful picture, isn't it? And I'm not for 1 second suggesting that the issue he was on about isn't important, though I don't give any views about it, that's not my right. But he happily bagged Woolworths and Aldi by name. We, and then others referred to as other corporate retailers for snubbing Australia Day. Why I emphasise that point is he had the privilege in the media of naming 2 companies and bagging them by name. I had a target on my back because I put something in an article in the Pioneer that was pulled. And yet it was not illegal at the time, it was not defamatory, it was not even slanderous. It was just asking people like yourself to go up to the winery office and read 3 specific sections of that PSA document. That's all.
Supplier agreement.
But it was whatever. But it was censored by the powers that be. 2 sources of the powers that be. Okay. Further to the Tony Passon thing. Well intended perhaps, but that is Australia Day is 1 day of the year. But it got that. We live 365 days a year with completely unacceptable trading terms by major corporates, but no glossy photo opportunities or major articles from him in the newspaper speaking out for us. A suggestion for all growers in this region. It doesn't matter about the colour of the politics. Issues like we face deserve a boots and all approach from our state and federal members. That's our right. Both Liberal, both our state and federal are Liberal. I'm not anti-Liberal. But neither of them has said anything publicly or in the press. When can you remember the last time you've had our state or federal MP say anything about the issues for grape growers with unsustainable prices in the region? I can't remember anything last year. The year before. Exactly. So maybe they need to ask themselves, are they failing us? A blue ribbon Liberal seat with its main power base in the southeast of South Australia needs to remember we are voters too. We might not have the votes or the power to overturn someone, but this might just scare them a little bit. So they need to remember we're voters too and we need federal support, opposition or not. If you can't do much better, maybe we voters should be thinking of independent representation at the next election. Independents aren't tied to a party lip service line or the possibility of kissing corporate bums. Mr. Passon and Mr. Whetstone, Let's see some letters in the media, not just our Murray Pioneer, calling for the urgent need for sustainable grape prices that meet the cost of production higher when the market permits, and address this in our Parliament. And if they say, well, this is really something we can't do, that is bollocks, because it was done in the 1970s or whenever the date I did research this, but I forgot, is what led to the minimum legislated price, which is still there under the SA, Grape Supply Agreement Act of 1991. So it's been done before, and it was done, by the way, in case because I look around and there are some other growers who've got grey hair like me. So I've been around, not that I remember exactly how this started, but I do remember being a recipient of the benefits of a minimum legislated price in South Australia. I grew up as probably a kid in the latter part of primary school and as a teenager with this, where practically every family who sent wine grapes subject to an indicative subject to a legislated price based on the CPI. So growers knew not only what they were getting, they knew it was above the cost of production. Better if the market permitted. Now, you know, and that was in South Australia. So things can be done, and if someone says, well, you can't do it because now everything's changed because there's New South Wales and there's Victoria. Boundaries don't stop bad behaviour. State boundaries do not say, well, we can't help you because we're in New South Wales. The Riverland Grape Growers Association, they've been hard pressed for up until the end of last year for nearly 6 years, their chair told me. He mentioned one particular winery, but I won't mention the name. Contractual situations, limited time, coming along a week before harvest and then saying, oh, look, sorry, don't want your grapes. And I said to him, if you've been putting up with this for 6 years, why haven't you put in reports to the Code Secretariat that under the Australian Wine and Grape Incorporated national body to say, hey, we've got a problem? And he said, you've got to remember, he said, you know, it'd be the same for you. He said, you grow a perishable commodity, a highly perishable commodity. He said, our growers do not have the security of long-term contracts. So he said, they're frightened of putting their hand up. So you ring up the Code Secretariat and they say, oh, well, no, we don't have problems brought to our attention. Hello? Got the same from the chair of the Murray Valley growers dealing with Victoria, based in Mildura. Same thing. And words like growers are hesitant, growers are nervous, growers are frightened to put their hand up to say they've had a problem or they've been treated unfairly. That has got to stop in this country, not just in the Riverland. That's all the more reason why it needs to go back to a mandatory code. It's the only way of redressing that. And it has to happen as a matter of urgency. And I hope, and like I said, Frank doesn't have a magic wand and is a state MP. But at least it's good that he's here and he can go back with stuff, and I have no doubt that he would actually look at doing something as much as possible to try and push this case. That ultimately it's not just us, it's the bigger picture. So the last couple of bits, if you can bear with me for a tick.
Just on that, Jason, that's why they want to get rid of the PSA, for that exact reason.
Yeah.
They don't want us to have any power whatsoever.
None, absolutely.
And if you change in any form whatsoever, one word, then we won't have...
530 CCW.
George, I'm at a meeting. All right? No.
530 CCW growers is the last stumbling block of grower unity. You think about that. If that didn't exist, what would independent growers actually get for their grapes? So anyone who's, and this is rude of me to say this, But anyone who sticks their hand up, especially if they're supposed to be on an organisation that, God forbid, is supposed to represent us, and says, oh, it'd be a good thing if CCW folded or whatever, because, you know, then you wouldn't have your area contracts. And rubbish like that would mean you would all have to grow better quality grapes, and then our industry would improve because we'd have better quality wine. Where has this person been in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, etc.? I mean, there are so many holes in that argument. It's worse than a sieve. So, in conclusion, to the people who are supposed to represent us on grower bodies, stop paddling your own agendas. Get into grassroots issues to get profitability back on track for growers. Sustainability isn't a blueprint program for 10 years or anything else. Sustainability starts with what every person in this shed and every other grape grower around Australia actually gets for the commodity that they take 12 months to grow and have to pay every single input known to human beings without any ability to price control any of those items. And without the ability to control any of the prices of those items, generally based on law. Can any of you go to your back workers and say, oh, look, boy or girl, sorry, but I have to actually cut your salary down by about 60% because things are tough. Well, good luck with that one. Can you go to elders and say, hey, 132 litres, whatever it is for a 20-litre drum of Roundup, things are a bit tight, Uncle Elders.
I'll give you 30.
Yeah, I'll give you 30, or because I'm generous, more generous than Jim, I'll give you 40. Well, I know what they'd say in Elders in Barmah to Jason Perrin, and it wouldn't be Happy Christmas. So, in conclusion, remember what Jim Giargis said in his opening address. Why is it with wineries that their tanks are full at 300 per tonne, but they have plenty of space at 150 or less? Call this out, end the creative accounting around the supply and demand garbage. We've been fed that for years. A grower chair of an organisation that we all know, but I won't mention his name, a couple of weeks ago by phone said, Jace, what don't you understand about basic economics? It's supply and demand. And I gave him some examples back and said, listen, both of us have been around long enough where we know what supply and demand is, and we know how it can be manipulated. And we know how it's been manipulated in the past. Supply and demand was around in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. But it was manipulated so badly that the growers after the Second World War formed a committee, lobbied hard enough, and the State Parliament of South Australia legislated the minimum price. Now, no politicians, I think Frank would probably agree, legislation doesn't happen overnight, and it's not easy, I would imagine, for legislation to be put before the two houses of Parliament and passed by the Legislative Council, let alone something that actually impacted on pricing. But it was done. Why? Because they recognised then that growers were being screwed because we grew a highly perishable commodity. Has that changed, ladies and gentlemen? Has it changed in 2024? No. So, you can see it's not new. It's not something that we've just fallen out of the sky and it's just happened. We've had all this stuff before and it's been handled different ways, but it has to be handled and taken at a political level. We can have Channel 7, we could have Channel 10, with due respect for the ABC, and that's a good start. It has to be presented to people to say there is a major issue, and these people are the first ones to really pick up big time. And it's risky, but our futures are at stake. And I'll be buggered if I'm going to spend nearly 40 years investing and starting off where I did 3 jobs rather than take an inheritance from my father who offered to set me up after 2 brothers failed to work for him successfully. And after a teaching career, I might add, where I learnt the hard way, you can't trust anyone even if it was a Catholic system. And I had to actually take them to court, and it was settled out of court. That was a learning curve for me at the age of 27 because I was young and naive. But it taught me from there on, A, not to trust people bigger than yourself, and not to ever let someone screw me into the ground. And I'm not going to have that happen to me, and I'm not going to have it to my neighbours. And I'm not going to have it done to the history of CCW that is about, what, 101 years? Didn't we have a celebration last year, supposedly, for its 100 years?
Yes.
And those people who ran that company prior to the employment of the first CEO, who basically bankrupted us, up until that point, we had a cooperative that was pretty well cash rich. And it operated for growers. Something changed where the first CEO and subsequently, and some of the board included, did not actually remind these people and say, you are not here on a board of BHP or blah, blah, blah. You are a cooperative. You are accountable to growers. And look in the rule book, unfortunately, if any of you haven't done that. Section 49, the powers of the board, 1 and 2. So basically at the moment, the way it's so basic, because that rule book was designed years ago, where people had good, honest conduct. We had company secretaries who did a damn good job. And the last one prior to Karen, and this is no disrespect to her, the last one of any length of time, Mark Boyd, he would have known, if there was 5 cents missing, he would have known where to look or stayed until he found that 5 cents to balance the books on our behalf. That's the calibre of people we had. And then things started to go downhill with the employment of the first CEO, who thought he did not have to represent growers or speak to growers. People like me, and I'm not the only one, he said, if you want to know what's going on, I don't have to tell you unless you get on the board. That's what he said to me, and I know 2 other growers he said a similar thing to. And that leads up to part of the stuff where we are today. No wonder an American author years ago, Mark Twain, said, God first made an idiot.